I would like to welcome you to our webinar on When the Children's Aid Society Comes Calling. I am Andrea Collins Fitzpatrick, and I'm the Legal Director for METRAC. Before I start today, I want to recognize that today is a very historic day in Canada, as it marks Canada's first observance of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. It allows us to remind ourselves of the painful legacy of the residential school system and intergenerational harm caused to Indigenous families and communities, particularly given the recent discovery of unmarked graves at former residential schools. We cannot have this conversation in our webinar today without recognizing the harm that continues to be caused to Indigenous children, families, and communities by the child welfare system. In recognition of the importance of this day, I invite you to learn more by attending an event, speaking with or listening to elders, reading the Truth and Reconciliation report, or engaging in quiet reflection. I would now like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that this land is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still home to many Indigenous peoples. We honor all the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people living on this land. We recognize the traditional territories on which our organization is located and on which our programs and trainings take place. I would like to note that this webinar is for general information purposes only and is not legal advice. The legal information provided is not intended to be used as legal advice for a specific legal problem. We will also be recording this webinar, and it will be posted on our website shortly. Please note that academics who are doing research on this topic may be observing this webinar today. So please be aware that anything you share in the Q&A session may be documented in project reports. If you're taking notes for research or observation purposes, please do not include any identifying information of individuals or organizations in any notes or write-ups. Please be reminded not to use any client names or identifying information so as to protect the privacy of community members. Before I move to our presentation, I would like to tell you a bit about METRAC. METRAC works to end gender-based violence across communities through education, research, and policies. We have been in existence since 1984, and our programs are devoted to advancing safety, justice, and equity. METRAC's Community Justice Program provides legal education and information related to gender-based violence. Through our Access to Justice program, we provide legal information in areas of family law, immigration law, criminal law, employment law, and human rights law. This webinar is part of our Family Law Education for Women, FLU, series. FLU's resources are available in 14 languages, ASL videos, and accessible formats. You can visit our website at onefamilylaw.ca for more information on your family law matters. Before I introduce our presenter, Carrie, I would also like to thank Kenny Ann, our Justice Program Coordinator, for running the PowerPoint presentation today, and our technician, Brian. I'm delighted today to have Carrie Guerin to speak to us about When the Children's Aid Society Comes Calling, and thank you all for joining us today. Carrie says she often gets asked, why is lawyer calling? She says that ever since she can remember, she would protest unfairness. As a young girl, she stood up to the bullies who harassed her schoolmates and now stands up to bullies at court. From age 3 in Carrie's family, everyone was expected to, quote unquote, take a position on a political topic and, quote unquote, back it up at the dinner table. She is grateful for those dinner table training sessions. As an adult, after seeing the bad deals many victims of violence were getting at courts, even at the hands of clearly violent exes, she felt compelled to create a group called Abused Women's Advocate. The dedicated volunteers at Abused Women's Advocate were community workers, social workers, public health nurses, lawyers, and Kerry. They supervised child access exchanges, provided victim witness support, did legal liaison with police and crown attorneys, and found community resources. Kerry also helped mothers create family law action plans. She brought this holistic approach into her family law practice when she took her call to the bar in 2000. Kerry remembers the amazing feeling she had her first year of law school when she walked into Osgood's legal clinic and saw her phone number on the wall for Abused Women's Advocate. Today, Kerry's motto remains focused on supporting women of violence as an Ontario-wide Children First family lawyer. I'll now hand things over to Kerry, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Andrea, and everyone participating. It's a real honor. I love sharing my strategies and tips. So what I'm talking about today is really the first steps to get you started. And I know a lot of you are here to support clients and people you know. So I might say you, but I mean whoever has this problem. And I really appreciate all of you out there who are helping, whether you're helping friends or as part of your work. It's so essential. So what to do when Children's Aid comes knocking on your door? I think we'll first start with that slide I chose. Yes, all the cheesy pictures are mine. So you get a sudden phone call and you worry what to say or do. And we've all heard about our clients in that situation. So I chose another slide with the lady on the phone because, you know, it's just such a scary thing to receive that call. And then what do you do when they show up? So they've arrived. What do you do now? That's mainly what we're talking about today. So one of the things is you can call a lawyer privately when Children's Aid or a child protection agency worker is there. My experience has been some people will call while they're there and they're afraid of the Children's Aid worker knowing, so they go and hide in their bedroom or the bathroom to call me. So I would say, generally, that's not a problem calling a lawyer, and it's fine to let the CAS worker, the Children's Aid worker, know that. So on the next slide, you can see that some of the lawyers are picking up the phone, coincidentally, when you call. Don't worry about the 9 to 5. Give a call. Plus, my experience has also been, and I know no experience is across the board, but the workers really often appreciate that you're calling a lawyer, even on the spot. Now, they might feel differently if your children are being taken away, but I have had that experience where someone calls at the moment their children are being taken away and they say, just please wait a moment. They call. You might not reach somebody. It doesn't apply to everybody, but you might luck out. And if the workers will wait a minute so you can talk to your child, I know some people have called a lawyer who can give advice what to say and do and what not to say or do. Some people know social workers, or they're in contact with a therapist or one of the amazing communities or social workers that we have here in Ontario and other jurisdictions, and they may give some guidance because you're overwhelmed. It's hard to know what to say and what to do. So the next one is yes, please. No, that's right. Thank you. Please don't sign until a lawyer reviews an agreement. It's not a negative intention that they hand over an agreement for you to sign. It just doesn't mean you have to sign it right away. And don't sign it unless you've reviewed it with a lawyer. I would like to tell you that there are many situations where signing it would be good and crossing off some parts would be good. And I've been on the receiving end of agreements as the potential client or the client tells Children's Aid, could I please just email this or do screenshots and send it to a lawyer to look at first? And then I can send back recommendations, cross off this, cross off that. These parts are fine, etc. Sometimes I'd say, no, we need to review it. I need more information. So it just depends on the circumstances. So don't be afraid to say, I've got to review it with a lawyer first. It's always better. So here's my attitude. I know it sounds unusual, at least some people tell me. Welcome that CAS or any child protection workers. Offer them a coffee, tea, water, etc. See that friendly face? Okay. Does she look guilty of anything? Does she look like she did anything bad? No. So oftentimes the child protection workers are greeted with extreme hostility. Instead, use a friendly demeanor. I don't know what the next slide is. Oh, yes. And when they're going, you're going to be waving goodbye with a smile on your face. Yes. Especially if you have your children in your arms. Now, obviously, if they're taking your children away, you don't have to be smiley or friendly. It's, perfectly be natural. You're going to be upset. So some things you can say. So I can't say exactly what to say in every circumstance, but many times you can really lower their guard a bit by saying, express some understanding that they have to investigate and that you will cooperate, but you do want representation. There's some things you might just openly speak to. What not to say? No, that's good. What not to say is even more critical. See, I chose a picture where a family started to argue in front of the worker or blame, or, here it's the child. You need to keep your cool, keep your calm. Yes, we all know of situations where they're biased and unfair. They're prejudging. We get it, but there's no point making those accusations. Even if they are being unfair, saying unfair things, you might want to address it if you feel confident of that. But keep note, a lawyer. If there's I can see my internet is unstable. I saw my internet was unstable, so I'm not sure if anyone could hear me there. So some things not to say is don't don't say how bad they are and how prejudiced they are. Don't say I know who reported me. Things like that. That is not going to work in your favor. And I'll give you an example that can be turned around, what they shouldn't say. After the meeting, keep note of what they might have said that showed bias right away, as soon as possible after the meeting. When I did duty counsel years ago, one of the workers, my client told me one of the workers showed up at her door and she was very friendly. She hadn't even met me or talked to me yet, and she knew about offering them coffee and refreshments. And the worker snarled, "No, I don't want you to poison me." And this worker was walking and talking poison herself. That attitude was completely unacceptable. The judge ordered that if the Aid Society was going to offer any services, they had to switch the worker. So it goes two ways. What you say and what they say is very important. So try to keep those notes right after the meeting, after any meeting. Then evidence is a whole other issue. So duty to report, yes, thank you. And I thank MEDRAC. I know Andrea and I talked about the importance, and my thing is duty to report child abuse. It's so important. Now, there's a number of slides. We'll skip through those gently, but we don't have to go through them at this minute. But just to let you know, even if you've already reported child abuse, if something else happens again, even regarding the same child, and it's similar abuse, you do have a duty to report it again. So we won't get into all the legalities. I want people to read this, though, whether you come back and read these slides and or Google Ontario duty to report child abuse. It's very important if you are the target or your client is the target of a children's aid investigation. When I say target, it's not always bad. It's not always negative. But if you're subject to that, then it's important to understand the worker's perspective. And here's why. And yes, you can go through all the duty to report slides. It's important because the child protection workers, they receive a report of child abuse. They must investigate if their supervisor authorizes it. They see things that you and I, not all of us, but most of us will never see. Situations that look minor on the surface, but were actually monumental and posed a great risk to the children, whether physically or emotionally. So keep that in mind when they call or knock on your door. The goal of the duty to report is to ensure children's rights to safety is secured. That's why I really felt it essential that we talk about that briefly, and I want you to put yourself in the position of aid investigators. And when you read it, you're going to see lawyers have a duty to report too. They just leave out anything that's subject to solicitor-client privilege. A intention to go and hurt somebody is not going to be subject to solicitor-client privilege. That's a future action. So then let's look at some examples. One of the things was who reports, and some common people who report that can really feel frustrating, whether there's any truth to the accusations or there's no truth. And I chose a slide after these slides on duty to report, where I show a neighbor peeking through the window. Oh, did I? Yeah, that one. Neighbors. Okay. Your neighbors might not know what's going on. They may have seen a small portion of an exchange. They may have different values. They might not like you. There's all sorts of reasons why may report. But what I'd also like to give to you is an example, because these reports are anonymous. It's really important, if you can, gather evidence to show it's not true or to provide context. And an example was a client from many years ago came home from a day full of shopping at the mall with her kids, loaded down with shopping bags. And what did she see is a very confused children's aid worker. It's not children's aid, it's a different jurisdiction, but a child protection worker knocking on her door. And she was confused. She said, "Oh, you're out here. I've been knocking on your door and phoning you all day." And well, her sound was off her phone. And what had happened is her ex-husband and his new girlfriend had made a series of anonymous calls, because he knew she usually doesn't get out of the house that day. That's not her usual shopping day. So they made reports, presumably from neighbors. Right. Okay. Fortunately, all she had to do was welcome the worker inside, which she did, and open up all those bags with those time-stamped receipts. Now, one is not always so lucky, but with technology today, sometimes we can prove other things were happening. It was just unlucky for her ex that she happened to go shopping all day. So now the next slide is about, and this is an important issue, concerned teachers. Teachers, I really pity them, because they have to make reports they don't even want to make. They may have full confidence in the parent, but because of something a child said, they are legally bound to report the issue. And my experience has been many times that the teachers would make fantastic, and do make fantastic, witnesses for some of my clients. They may fully support that my client is a great parent. And I understand the resistant witness who is the one who reported, because often the parents know it was the teacher. But let the lawyer interview them and determine if they're a good witness or not, because many times they're a fantastic witness. Now, other times they may have asked too many probing questions of the children or the child, and they didn't know how to interview. Other teachers are very careful to not ask probing questions, leaving it to the child protection workers or the police to do so. But I do have to tell you, there is an issue. Many police and social workers have been provided poor training for interviewing children, and I do address that later in this seminar on expert witnesses who can address that problem. The next slide is an example. The next slides, we're talking about duty to report. Here's a mom protecting her daughter. Guess what? Whether you live with a person who's abusive or not, if that person has access to your child, like your ex or even your own family member, and you're living in their home, or they have contact with your child, you must report their abuse. It's essential. And that includes domestic violence and other forms of abuse. So if you don't protect your children, you may end up explaining yourself to the child protection workers. And if you're resistant to protecting your child, they may protect your child for you. But what I found very, very frequently is the child protection workers love to help women who have abusive partners. They Generally, I would say the trend is not to go after the protective parent. Generally, there are exceptions to the rule. So the next series of concerns I'd like to discuss is negligent parenting issues. They can be life-threatening. So you see here, first example, it's very easy for a child to get away quickly. We even address a way young children can, be supported a bit better a little later on. But it just takes a moment. It really does. So a child may get to the stove. You got to make sure they can't get to the stove before you do all sorts of safety protocols. There's lots of tools out there for that. Guns not being locked up. We don't have a picture of that, but this is another really serious problem where if children get access to a gun, and yes, we're in Canada, so it's less common, but some people go hunting, some people have an illegal firearm in the house. And if it's not locked up properly and hidden, frankly, from children, that can be deathly. The next one is, I talk about safety gates. I know it seems like a minor thing. They are an amazing tool to help parents because children are active. They want to run around. And I had a situation years ago where one of my clients was asked by the child protection worker, you need to put up safety gates. My client is very resistant because she's a good, caring parent. She does pay attention. But I said, why don't you just try it? So she did. And wow, the children actually were quite content because in that area, they would play and do fun things. They didn't get upset about the safety gates the way my client anticipated. And she had prepared what to do if they got upset about it. But it was amazing for her. She could do a lot more things, get a lot more things done with those safety gates up. So sometimes the child protection worker will have ideas on safety. Listen to them, try it out. No harm done, right? So the next type of thing I'd like to talk about is licks cases, which is, spanking or hits. Wow, there are so many licks cases. And many times the child who is, talking about receiving licks may never have had a hand laid on them at all. So they're not all situations where the parents need to learn, don't hit your kid or don't spank. It's really not healthy for the child. That's a whole other issue. That's the no spanking zone I talk about later briefly. But this is really common. Children are at school. They're in a circle talking amongst themselves. And usually not with the teacher just sitting there. I couldn't find the just right picture. So one child will say, my dad gave me licks last night. And the next child joins in. Well, my mom gave me 4 licks last night. My mom and my dad gave me 10 licks. Some other child suddenly says, my parents give me licks all the time. They give me 10 licks, 20 licks. And that will be when the teacher walks by. And they'll only hear the one child. So that's the child who gets investigated. This is a really big issue. It's important, I feel very important, to gather evidence right away. So one of them might be, the first one would be, on our next slide, I show a private investigator here, and she's interviewing a teacher. Some of the teachers know, even the teacher who reports it, that children talk like this all the time. You'll want to have a PI or somebody appropriate, interview other parents, find out how many other children are talking this way, as well as making sure your children get heard and they can explain the story. That is really critical. I experienced something similar myself. Thank goodness Children's Aid didn't get involved, but my young child was my first child was in kindergarten, and we're out in public on the subway escalator, and he says, Mommy, I want a spanking. And I'm like, no, you don't. How do you know what a spanking is? So anyway, he keeps getting agitated and upset. Mommy, I want a spanking. And I'm saying, no, I don't understand. And I ask him, why are you asking for a spanking? And he says, all the other kids at school, their moms and dads give them a spanking. I was like, okay, now I understand. Uh-oh. So I had to pretend that lightly tapping Tushy in his great big snowsuit and going, spanky, 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 just to keep him quiet in public. Then he was delighted he got his spanking. So some of these kids never had a spanking in their life. So the next part, which I really love, is resources you can gather now. It's really important. So 1, get a lawyer. Absolutely. That's our next slide. Get a lawyer. I know I talked about this before, but yes, get a lawyer. The next one is witness statements. So, your Zoom, there's Zoom court now, there's Zoom meetings. It's beautiful. I love it, love it, love it. And you can gather witness statements this way. You can gather support from family, friends, neighbors, people who know you. And when my clients have got their statements up front, that was so helpful. There's just too many stories to tell you about, so I can't get into all of them, but it can be so helpful. It's really good if your lawyer does it. The reason being, if you have one, the reason being, I find that witnesses, family and friends, will tell me much more beautiful, in-depth stories than they tell their friend. So even emailing the friend who's dealing with a children's aid case, they're kind of shy, but to me, they will really give a lot of detail and say how fantastic their friend is. If they tell their friend is like, oh, I'm not that great. But with me, tell me more. So the next step, which I feel is really, really important, is to create a resource list and action plan. Now, you can maybe do it on your own if you don't have your lawyer yet or you don't have help. If you can do it with your lawyer, do it with if you have a social worker or a therapist, a good family member or a close friend you can trust, they can be helpful too. It's about creating a circle of care. I do feel it's important for people to know, even if you have no one to help you in your life at this time, maybe you were isolated, maybe you have an abusive partner who's, made everyone run away. There are great resources. And one of them is 211 Community Information. Yeah, it's back. Just sorry, the list. I probably will talk about 211 again. I have a note here to myself. Don't wax poetic about 211 for too long, because there's so many great things they do. It's so true. 211 is a community agency number. You can just call phone 211. You can go online, but think of anything you need to address the concerns of the Children's Aid Society and also your own concerns. What would help you? I'm just going to grab this list. Do you need help with food, housing, getting a social worker or therapist, getting medical help for your child? There's just so many agencies in this world, and you can call 24/7, okay? 24/7. Every day of the year, there's someone to answer your call. And sometimes they have creative ideas too. So I really love that. This is part of your action plan, regardless of what the issues are that the Aid Society wanted you to deal with. So they might be, and it can also deal with heavy duty things like, alcohol and drugs. If you have a medical condition where you need in-home supports, there are so many things that are so essential. Yes, shelter for temporary housing or, long-term housing as well. It's a catalog of whatever you need, I would say. Now, one of the other resources that you can get from 211, and I think is on our next slide, getting a counselor or therapist for your child is really important. Children need someone they can openly and freely speak with. This is critical. I would also say, if you get someone for yourself, and I didn't put that on a slide, but if you get someone for yourself, that is great as well, because a good counselor or therapist, and there's many agencies who have top quality people here in Ontario, and I know many specifically in Toronto, so who are awe-inspiring. They can help you plan out what to say and what to do to help your child during these times, whether your child's in your care or not in your care. The next slide, and also is something I've seen, quite frankly, child protection agencies often will help parents with all of these things as well. So not to make a plan necessarily, maybe some will, but with accessing resources more easily and more quickly. Sometimes they'll write support letters and make support phone calls. And I've even seen where one of my clients, the therapy he needed for his child it was not covered by OHIP, but it was really, really important. And they just didn't have the money. They were saving up the money, but it was really hard. It's really expensive. And the Child Protection Agency, if I get a little, a little heartwarming here, they paid for it and they got that family fast access to a medical expert to help their child. And it was just so beautiful. Chaos. The next one is about chaos with home chores. And hey, these are common cases, right? And it must feel so judgy to be, told, your place is a disaster. It's just not good for the children. But I'd like to share what Justice Penny Jones at 311 Jarvis Court provided in a seminar years ago about her experiences when she was a family lawyer and she was helping a mom who's dealing with a number of children and the chaos in the home. And she said, good enough is good enough. And as a judge, that's how she feels too. So once you tidy up or figure out ways to keep things in place better and try to, create some new protocols, maybe involving the children or friends or family, have your lawyer or someone your lawyer trusts check out your place, because you might not notice some potential dangers for young children, for example. So the next one, boozy party house, the next slide is slide's gone. But what I can tell you is this, that the boozy party house is a no way, no go. Yeah, that's the one. Not at your house. If for some reason there's going to be partying, not at your house, and make sure your children are somewhere else with reliable people. Just be careful. Look after you too. You can see there, that is a situation that is really horrible. The next one is an important zone to me, the no hitting children zone. Now, you might be entitled to use some physical discipline of some sort, but Children's Aid doesn't want you to. All child development, people, not all, maybe I shouldn't say all, but the majority understand that hitting a child sends the wrong message. Using force shows stronger people can hit weaker people. I mean, think about it. Do you think if someone hits you that you're going to become a better person? No. And there are wonderful resources available. Some of my clients, I would say, have converted from people who believed spanking was okay to great promoters of a no hitting or no spanking zone for children, because many communities even have, books and also social workers who can help you to think from the viewpoint of what it must feel like for the child. That's so essential. And also what you can do instead of hitting. The next slide is about medical care for your child, how important it is. And I'm just going to give you one story. I know I mentioned the other one earlier, which is beautiful, but it's important to get medical care. Let me give you an example. I had been kidnapped from one of my clients. My client eventually had contact with the child. Previous to this, the child had been deemed by experts as almost completely nonverbal. The child was all closed up, did not express joy, did not smile, barely spoke. My client insisted, my child has no medical problem. I know my child. I understand it's been years that they had been kidnapped and kept away from me. During the very first contact, this sweet child opened up, smiled, little chatterbox filled with joy. Oh my goodness. Well, it's not the medical people's fault per se. They had never known about my client's existence. So when that happened, it was very, very helpful. Very, very helpful. So getting a medical expert is great. Yes, the next one is evictions. Now, Legal Aid has amazing legal clinics, I've got to say, and I'm going to try to move this along a bit quickly. Amazing legal clinics. I love, love, love our legal clinics I know the ones in Toronto, but they're just amazing. They have often top-notch lawyers. And Legal Aid they're hiring very carefully. They choose very carefully. These people are dedicated. That's what I can say. I can also say that sometimes the Aid Society has provided first and last or a month's rent to help the person. The next one is slide is lack of food and more. That's a very serious concern, but 211, again, you can get resources. The next slide, family violence is child abuse. This is very important, and a lot of the child protection cases are about domestic violence or family violence and how this harms children. The next slide is my big shout out to 211, which you heard earlier. I cannot say enough about them. That's all I can say. 211, 211. Yes. And the next one. So it's about community caring. So use your friends and family to create a circle of care. But also, if you have no one, 211, call those community agencies. They can be very helpful. The next few slides, I'm just showing some examples of who might support you in a tough time, even if, things might not be perfect. Let your lawyer pre-screen. Grandparents, the next one, other loving family members, older siblings. The next one, sisters, supporting sisters, maybe not even biological, just can be, religious friends or friends in your community who are there for you. The next slide, you don't have to do it all alone. Do consider getting support from the very people that are around you who are good, caring people. The next slide is victim assistance. So there's many resources out there, including Assaulted Women's Helpline. Call 211 for a list of various resources who are amazing. And 41, that's my slide number. The next slide, expert testimony, is really key. I have used expert witnesses, private investigators, criminal case analysis, who analyze the police reports, the children's aid reports, and find where they have misled or led or guided a child unfairly or inappropriately. There's also doctors out there who understand bruising, if your child has bruises or marks, and actually know how to assess them. Don't rely on the experts of the Children's Aid Society. Get your own through your lawyer. The last one is judges. Family court judges want children safe, and they want families to succeed. A lot of our judges here in Ontario were family lawyers first. And my impression, even if I don't share all the same values with all the family lawyers, is the majority of our family court judges are deeply compassionate and care deeply about our children and families.
We really appreciate you joining us, and thank you again so much, Carrie.
Thank you. It's an honor.